Hello and welcome to everyone joining. We're so excited you're here. We do have a chat open for you to send messages to the panelists here. And so if you want to share excitement or questions, we're so grateful to have Renee and Nicholas with us, and we'll get started with the full agenda in just a minute. Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for attending our 1619 Education Conference. We are really excited to celebrate the work of our network teams with you. I want to welcome you to this keynote on Born on the Water. I'm Donnelly Jamna, or DJ, the K-12 Partnerships Manager at Pulitzer Center, and I'll be the moderator for the conversation today. After a brief introduction to this virtual space and Pulitzer Center as an organization, I'll introduce our guests today, Renee Watson and Nicholas Smith, and turn it over to them. So the Pulitzer Center raises awareness of underreported global issues through direct support for quality journalism across all media platforms and a unique program of education and public outreach. We're proud to be an education partner for the 1619 Project. Our 1619 Education Network consists of teams of educators from across the country who collaborate together with Pulitzer Center staff, journalists, and historians. This conference is a culminating celebration of their work and effort this year. We are thrilled to have 1619 Project contributors like Renee Watson and Nicholas Smith here with us for this event. I think we're gonna hear our slides back up in a minute, but I'll go ahead and read Renee's bio first. Renee Watson is a New York Times bestselling author. Her young adult novel, Piecing Me Together, received a Newbery Honor and a Coretta Scott King Award. Her books for young readers include Harlem's Little Blackbird, The Story of Florence Mills, which was nominated for an NAACP Image Award, and Ways to Make Sunshine, which received the SCBWI Golden Kite Award. She has given readings and lectures at many renowned places, including the United Nations, the Library of Congress, and the US Assembly in Japan and New Zealand. Renee is on the Council of Writers for the National Writing Project and is a member of the Academy of American Poets Education Advisory Council. Renee grew up in Portland, Oregon, and splits her time between Portland and New York City. To read more about her work, visit www.reneewatson.net. Nicholas Smith is a Houston, Texas-born activist, picture book author, and Hollywood film illustrator. He is the author-illustrator of The Golden Girls of Rio, nominated for an NAACP Image Award, My Hair is Poofy and That's Okay, and World Cup Women. As a Black illustrator, Nicholas is focused on creating captivating art that can spark important conversations around social justice in today's world and inspire meaningful change. Many of his viral, globally shared and published sketches are included in his book, Sunday Sketch, The Art of Nicholas. Nicholas also speaks on his artivism at conferences, workplaces, and schools around the world, and leads workshops in digital painting, character and movie poster design. He lives in Los Angeles, California, and you can learn more about his work at www.nicholas.art. We want to thank you both so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having us. I am so excited to be in conversation with you, Nicholas. I'm excited to meet all these educators. I often say educators are my favorite kind of people, so it's good to be spending some quality time with you today, even if it's virtually. I'm going to start off by reading the last two poems of Born on the Water, and then Nicholas is going to share some art, and then we'll get into the conversation. I'll be reading Legacy and Pride. And I wanted to say the reason why Nicole and I thought we would do this book in verse instead of just a longer narrative form. It's because we really wanted to have containers for young people to process their emotions. And each poem kind of acts as a small vignette. So you can pause and kind of breathe through the whole book and take it in bite-sized pieces or read it all at once. Poetry lends itself to holding heavy emotions. And we wanted to make sure that since we were dealing with a heavy subject matter, that we provided a way of telling the story that would kind of help young people with their emotions and the educator who's reading it to the child. We also wanted to honor Black storytelling, spoken word, and think about how we have passed down stories from generation to generation and how poetry has been a big part of that, poetry and song. So these last two poems, were inspired by our thinking of, we wanted to make sure we ended on a hopeful note, but that we did not try to communicate and they all lived happily ever after, because we know that the fight for democracy is not over. So how do we help young people see their place in history and also give a challenge for where they can continue and how they can go on? So if you notice, the book does not end in a period, it ends in an ellipsis, because we wanted to give this idea of, you now pick up the torch, young person, and continue this story. And now that you know this history, what are you going to do with the world that you've inherited? This is legacy. And the people who were born on the water survived, kept living and living. It was illegal to teach enslaved people how to read, but they birthed generations of teachers and librarians, scholars and authors. They were brokenhearted, beaten and bruised, but they became healers and pastors, activists, doctors and counselors. No one could steal the people's joy. They wrote songs, created jazz and hip hop, rhythm and blues. They became inventors and athletes, nurses and cooks, pilots and architects, farmers and housekeepers, singers and artists, dancers and poets, mathematicians and scientists. They passed on their stories through the stitch of a quilt, shared secret messages through songs. The people survived. The people fought. And because the people survived and because the people fought, they finally got freedom. And because the people survived and because the people fought, America has equality in the law. And because the people survived and because the people fought, America began to live up to its promise of democracy. It is the people who fight for this democracy still. Pride. Grandma looks at me and my brother, tells us this is why we say Black Lives Matter, why we celebrate Black girl magic, why we believe we are our ancestors' wildest dreams. Never forget, we are their hope. Never forget, you come from a people of great strength, Grandma says. Be proud of our story, your story. The next day, I go to school and pull out my red crayon, my blue and my white. I draw the stars and I draw the stripes of the flag of the country that my ancestors built, that my grandma and grandpa built, that I will help build too. And I am not ashamed. I know what my story is, where I am from, where I begin. I will turn it over to you, Nicholas.
Thank you, Renee. That was beautiful. I absolutely love it when you read from the book. And when you read from the book, it reminds me of like when I first got those poems from you, Nicole, and was just trying to like figure out like, how am I going to visualize like these powerful words? How am I going to put it into imagery? And so I just wanted to share really quick a few of those pieces. And the first one is actually the end papers, which before you even get into the story, where I was just trying to really through scarification pattern, try to tell the entire story that you guys wrote. And so like, it's kind of like in pattern and cryptic, but it's all there, the whole story. And then just the fact that, you know, the story does not begin with the whips and the chains, but in a beautiful, loving, joyful kingdom. of Ndongo, and just that alone was just, it was a beautiful way to go into the book. And obviously, And They Dance, which is like one of my favorite spreads. I talk about that one a lot, and I feel like with that one, it kind of, I feel like we're going back to like the origins of like the Black joy that we always talk about, and you know, it was there, and even a lot of the dances, a lot of the songs, a lot of the you know, the celebratory customs that we have now comes from these moments. And I just think it's beautiful that young folks can kind of look at that to kind of start to trace back and say like, oh, this is where this dance or this music or this, you know, these things come from. And of course, it goes into so much of the heartbreak and so much of the struggle, and all of the resistance. And I love that you guys, you know, intentionally put that in there to say like, there was a lot of resistance, there was a lot of fighting back to be able to get, you know, to get their freedom back. Like they had to do a lot of fighting, and ultimately, from the legacy poem that you just read, like all of the amazing and influential and innovative and ingenious people that came from this moment of struggle. And so, yeah, at this, I will say it a million times. I feel like this is one of the most patriotic books ever made. Maybe I'm biased, but I think it is. And I'm just honored that I had the opportunity to, you know, illustrate these amazing poems. So yeah, we can talk a little bit more about everything.
I love seeing your work, and I love seeing the images without the words on the page as well.
Oh.
I remember when Nicole and I were talking about who are we going to have to illustrate this book, and we were working with Namrata, who's our editor, and she gave us portfolio. It was such an easy pick. And we were like, Nicholas, we want him. Can you please make this happen? And I'm just so glad that you said yes and that it all worked out, because you really brought, I mean, we were trying so hard in the words to care for the reader and to make sure that we were not traumatizing them with the words, but that we were telling the truth, that we were balancing joy and sorrow, you know, all of that. And I think it's equally hard to do that in images. So I would love if you could talk a little bit about how did you approach the work to make sure that what you were putting on the page captured the story, but without being too heavy. I think you do a really great job of showing the full range of the emotions in the book. How did you approach that work?
Thank you. Yeah, that was one of the tough things, because it's like when somebody comes to you and say like, create a children's book about slavery, you know, it's like one of the heaviest things that, you know, that we deal with. And I think one of the things that I always try to put in my artwork is like, if I can just show the humanity of my ancestors, if I can, like, I feel like that's a way to kind of put other people in my shoes, or the shoes of Black people, is to show the humanity and show, even if it's hard, like show the struggle. And I think, so this was like, obviously like the cover, this is one of the first images that I sketched and sent you guys. And that was the moment where like, I was trying to figure out, okay, like how can I kind of show like that kind of push, that, you know, that they were going through something very challenging. I didn't want to have like chains or anything like that shows that they're being held back, but like to show that they are persevering, that they're looking forward, even though they were in a way looking forward. And you see like clouds that are really reminiscent of cotton, and there is a lot of heaviness that they were going to have to go through. But how can I kind of show that struggle, but still make it something that that people can see hope in, or can see like the light at the end of the tunnel in a way. So it was a lot of like balancing, the struggle with the hope and the joy. For pretty much every poem, it was like that. But yeah, you guys seem to, for the initial sketch, you guys seem to like it, and I was like, great, this is gonna work, and we just kind of went from there.
Yeah, well, we loved it. We didn't just like it. I loved the strength in their facial expressions too. I think that there's so much that's subtle but very powerful and palpable on the page, that they are, wading in this water, pushing through, but there's such a resolve and determination in their facial expressions. And there's something about that felt really powerful. And I want to circle back to what you said about starting in their humanity. I remember the first meeting I had with Nicole about this book, and we talked a lot about wanting to make sure we did not start on the slave ship, but that we showed who these people were before they were enslaved, and that they loved their families, that they were talented and brilliant and good with their hands, had strong minds, understood math and science, and that is why they were chosen, really, and stolen to come, is because of what they could do. And I had never heard, I've never read history in that way. When slavery was taught, it was always taught from this place of, lack, as if the enslaved people were not smart, they were just hard workers and they just did labor, and that they didn't actually contribute and build this nation with their minds and with their actual bodies. And I wanted to know, how were you taught about slavery? What do you hope teachers are doing in the classroom with this book? What are your thoughts about kind of reframing the way we talk about slavery, Black history, all of that? What are your thoughts on that?
Wow. For me, growing up in Texas, I learned, I just remember learning very little about my ancestors, and the whole, transatlantic slavery and all of this stuff. It just wasn't really there. There was a lot of like the Alamo and Davy Crockett and all of that. And I still remember all those stories. And now that I'm, uncovering more, I'm I'm realizing how much of even those stories that they made seem so grand and wonderful were really about keeping slavery alive, especially in Texas. There were so many stories like that where we just learned about them as like American heroes, but like so much from that to, even obviously like, the Revolutionary War, all these things were like, there was so much connected to the South wanting to keep slavery alive. And so I just feel like, I always say, like, why is it that even stories like that are in the 1619 Project of the Black people who, built the Capitol, and even the statue on the Capitol, and all of these things that don't get talked about, but then the George Washington stories and all of these things that do get talked about. It's like, if we're picking and choosing what should be there and what should be left out, like what does that say to the little Black and brown kids who are in the class, who they're seeing that, oh well, the story of my ancestors must not be that important, or as people they must not be that important if they're not included. And so this whole like working on this project and everything has really showed me like how intentional that we should and could be, more so like than we are, about like just telling history like it is. And also because there's a million things that could be omitted, but it's like, what what are we going to now incorporate, now that we're very clear about you know, what exactly happened? You know, what are we going to now continue to omit, and what are we going to add to the curriculum? So that's a question for many amazing teachers and not me, but yeah, I just wish that, again, I wish that I had a book like this. I wish I had, you know, stories and lessons like this when I was growing up.
Yeah, I often felt erased from history, from the stories that were told. If it weren't for my mother who taught us, you know, where we come from and told us our story. And I mean, like at the dinner table, in car rides, going to the grocery store, my pastor at church, I learned Black history in that way. And through, I mean, I think I was in elementary school for sure when I watched Eyes on the Prize. And we always talked about the fuller story and everything that was left out of history books. So if I didn't have that, I wouldn't know. When I went to school, and I grew up in Portland, Oregon, so I'm in a predominantly white city, often one of the only Black children in the classroom, and except for high school, but elementary and middle school. And yeah, I felt so like, wait a minute, this isn't what I'm hearing at home. Why are we talking about the resistance, the brilliance, the poets, the activists, besides Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks? And even in those stories, why are they being told in this very simplified way? I remember being in my 20s when I first heard like the fuller story of the boycott, the bus boycott in Montgomery, and that it wasn't just happenstance. You know, the way that I was taught was like, Rosa Parks was so tired and weary, and she just sat down one day because she could, you know, and and all of a sudden this movement started, you know. But it was like, no, when I realized how strategic they were, that they had planned this out, all the logistics that had to go into organizing and getting people to work and carpooling and all of that. I mean, that also is a part of the brilliance, and that change is something that you work towards. It doesn't just happen. And there is a benefit for not telling us that, right? For not empowering young people to see themselves, that they can be change makers. They might not be the person making the speech. They might be the one making the phone calls. They might be the one organizing on a smaller level, but that is going to make such a big impact. And so, yeah, I wish that I had more local history of Black people in Portland and in the Pacific Northwest, because that story of the Great Migration also gets erased. We talk a lot about the South to the North, but not really, well, what about the Black folks in Seattle and Portland? And so I learned a lot as an adult and felt cheated in a way by my teachers, and was very sad and angry that how is it that I didn't know this, and why didn't they want me to know? And so I think about who that benefits when you leave parts of the story out, or when you start with the second part and not the first, like starting on the slave ship and not in West Central Africa. I think about all of that, and I'm so grateful that we have teachers who are pushing against that and saying, no, let's tell a fuller story, and let's honor the brilliance of a people. Let's honor all their contributions, and let's not just talk about them through struggle and pain, but also through their joy. So I'm really grateful that there are so many educators with us this morning who are thinking about this and wanting to grapple with this text with their young people. And yeah, I wish that I had more of that, especially in elementary school. And I also wish that I had teachers who said to me, you know, yeah, you can raise your voice in a really big way, and you can be the person making the grand speech and protesting and marching. You can do that. You also can use your voice in a smaller, everyday way and stand up for a friend who's being bullied, or write a poem that honors an everyday hero in your life. And I hope that we begin and continue to talk about activism, which I would love for you to touch on with your artivism, as how can young people who sometimes feel powerless, they cannot vote, they're following rules at home, rules at school, but when they do have power, it is in their art making. They can choose, you know, when to break a line, how to use color on a page, and how can we allow space for them to raise their voices against injustice through art making, which I think is, I didn't really start doing them a little bit in high school. That was kind of the seedlings of that started with one of my high school teachers, but it wasn't until college that I really started seeing myself as, oh, I'm not just a writer, I'm an activist too. And I can use my art as a means to say something and do something in the world. So can you talk a little bit about your experience with art as activism and maybe how this impacted your work with 1619 Project?
Sure. I mean, for me, I mean, I am the type of person who doesn't talk a lot and like an introvert. And so for me, having art to be able to speak for me, it was very, that was a big deal for, because it's almost like you were saying, like, that is where I realized, okay, that's how I can be an activist in some sort of way if I use my artwork. And so a lot of what I do, which I really like to do, is to almost like teach history lessons through the artwork. And so like there might be a time where like there was a moment where I kind of wanted to shift the conversation that, Martin Luther King was just the I have a dream speech guy. So I created a piece of like that depicted him, in his mugshot where he was in jail, because I wanted people to see that like he was actually a fiery protester who was arrested many times and did a lot more than what they will show typically on TV. And it's a lot of moments like that throughout history. Like even artwork that I did of like Selma and marching and John Lewis and moments where the artwork is like the captivating thing and gets people to stop scrolling and say like, what is this? And then from there, I can include like a little history lesson, or, sometimes it's also like directing people to, sign this petition or text justice to this number. Because so many people, they want to get involved with how can they help be part of the solution, but it's like a lot of times they don't know what to do. And so the art is a lot of times that hook that gets people to stop, and then you can take them in this direction, like to say, this is how you can actually be a part of actually changing the problem. So that's in a nutshell is what artivism is to me. And so it's just been, it's really, especially those moments where I can use the art to take people through history and get them to learn. And a lot of times they say like, wow, I didn't know that. If I hadn't scrolled and stopped on your artwork, I wouldn't have learned that lesson, that part of history. Those are the beautiful moments for me.
What do you can you talk about who you were as a child? Like, I'm so curious about Nicholas in elementary school, 5th grade Nicholas. Thinking about the educators who are here today, like, what did you need from teachers when you were in the 5th grade? And did you have any teachers who you remember as being like, oh, that was my favorite teacher, I'll never forget the way they, impacted me?
Mm-hmm. I feel like that your stories about growing up are similar to mine. Growing up in Spring, Texas, Houston, Texas, predominantly white schools. I was maybe one or two Black kids in the class. I didn't get a lot of pretty much any of the Black history lessons from them, but I did get it at home and at church and all these other places. And it's like, I don't know, I didn't expect them to give that. So it's almost like I wasn't looking for them to do that, because my mom made it very clear that they weren't gonna do that. And so I remember being the one, like, when it's the dress up day or whatever, she would put the grease in my hair to make me look like Frederick Douglass or whoever, and Crispus Attucks or whatever, and send me to school. And I would be giving the Black history lessons to my teachers. And so it's just like, it was just different. I don't know. And so I wish, if knowing what I know now, if I like somehow went back, I wish I could, tell them that there are stories that should be more inclusive and should be incorporated. But they were going by the textbook, obviously, and just how, especially, I mean, this was like 80s, the late 80s, early 90s, like textbooks in Texas. You can imagine what they were like. And that's what we had. So but again, I just feel like I'm glad that I got it from somewhere. But in this day and age, like, so many teachers, I love how, like, a lot of the students that I grew up with who are now teachers in Texas are telling me, like, I'm incorporating this. We're doing so much. Like, it seems like it's totally different now. Or at least that the things are shifting and it's going into the right direction. So I love that.
I wish that my teachers asked more questions. I feel like education was very, top down. I am the adult, the all-knowing one, and I have something to teach you and give you. Sit here, child, and learn. And yes, obviously, they are the adult and they do know more, but they don't know everything, and they didn't know me. And so what would have been more helpful is to have a teacher feel like they are in kind of collaboration with my mom and with my church community, with all the other people in my life. They are coming alongside those people to kind of, raise me in a way, and asking me, who do I love? Who loves me back? What am I proud of? What are my fears? What are my challenges? What do I like to do? I think getting to know your students is so important before you can teach them anything. And I could tell which teachers cared about me and who was just coming to do their job and teach, and who really didn't want to get to know me. I remember teachers saying things like, leave your personal life at the door. Wow. This is class, like, how do you say that to a child? I'm bringing all of me into the classroom, and I want to be seen and validated in the curriculum, and also just in the interactions with the adult in the room. And so as a teaching artist, when I've gone into the classroom, I try to really see past stereotypes, see past whatever file has come with the child of the fights they've been in, and all the record of their existence at the school. Sometimes I'll go in to teach an extended poetry residency, like for a whole school year. Once a week, I've gone in and taught like a 90-minute class. So I have a planning meeting with the teacher. And sometimes the first thing they say to me are the negative things about the class. Well, just so you know, this class, and then there's this laundry list of all the things that are going to be challenging and why they might not write. Don't take it personal if they're not really into poetry, and on and on and on and on. So I come into the classroom with the knowledge of, okay, the kids who sit in that corner are that kind of kid, and these ones are like this. And then I have to think, no, Renee, see them for who they are beyond just that. Even if that stuff is true, and I don't, we're not going to be in denial that we, as educators, there's a lot of challenges. Our young people are bringing a lot with them. So I'm not saying, let's ignore all of that, but how do I see that and see other parts of them? And I feel like so many of my teachers, especially in middle school, did not truly see me. They saw my zip code, they saw the color of my skin, my gender, and they based how they taught me off of whatever assumptions and stereotypes that came along with what they saw. And so, I think if I were to go back and be able to have conversations with some of those teachers, I would ask them to ask me more questions and to listen and to really to see me, and then to make me visible in the curriculum. And again, and I would also ask to start with my joy and not my pain. And when I say my, I mean Black people, women, just approaching education and history from a place of people's humanity and not just what happened to them. I think that that's really important. And I'm grateful. I know the difference. I remember, I always shout out Linda Christensen, who was my high school English teacher, who was amazing at making us feel like we had something to offer this class, that she wasn't only coming to teach us, but we were teaching her. She was a white woman who did not grow up in our neighborhood, and she was teaching us, and we could tell her about our family meals, the recipes that were passed down from generation to generation, what corner stores we like to go to, like all of that was in the classroom. As well as what she had to teach us. And we could write poems about anything. She didn't censor us. And that was liberating to feel like all of me is a part of this curriculum. And if I have anger or sadness, I can pour that into the page and in my essay or in this poem. And giving us books. I feel like she took us around the world in the verses of poems and in the pages of books. She really exposed us to a diverse canon at a time when that wasn't the thing to be doing. Again, I grew up in the same era as you, late 80s, early 90s. So she was breaking some of those rules and figuring out how to find allies who would come alongside her, other teachers in the building who were like, you know, we're going to be with these students and love them and educate them. And yeah, that was powerful for me. So while I do have all the kind of like, this teacher was not so great, I do also have teachers who I love and who really poured into me. And I'm very, very grateful for that. I am who I am for so many reasons, but one of the reasons is because of teachers like Linda, who really saw me and took me serious as a writer early on and said, I think you have something to say. Here's a notebook. And beyond the writing assignments I'm giving you in class, you should be writing. And that was important too, to have the empowerment to learn outside of the classroom. Like she would say, watch the news and come back and tell me what you think of what you saw. Instead of just telling us, she really made us like engage with the world. And that was, it just taught me to be a critical thinker and to be a good listener, which was a skill I needed as a writer, is to listen to what is happening in the world so that I can respond.
That's beautiful.
What is next for you? What are you working on? What's coming up? Good question. That you can share. You might not be able to share.
I can okay. Share because I'm pretty sure they announced it. I'm illustrating another children's book with another amazing writer. And her name is Ruby Bridges. And she's obviously iconic. And it's just cool because she's telling the story from her perspective as a 6-year-old child, being that first Black kid in all white schools. And again, just another honor to be able to have, the opportunity to illustrate something that is so important in our history. And really just American history. Again, this book, that book, there are moments in American history that need to be talked about and not put on banned lists and all these things. And all of, that this one might be on a banned list as well.
Right, before it even comes out.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so exciting.
Yeah, so that one is coming out end of this year, fall of this year. And then the following year, next year, is about the Confederate flag. So maybe 3 straight banned books, who knows? Yeah.
That's so good. I'm so glad to hear that these books are coming out in the world at a time when there is so much pushback. Like this is what I love about us. We know I say this a lot, we know how to make a way out of no way. That was passed down to us. And so I get a lot of questions about how are you feeling about the book banning and, and then really putting into law in some places, and centering white comfort and all of that. And I am angry and frustrated. And in some ways, I can't believe we're having that conversation. In other ways, of course, I can, because I understand that every time things move forward, there's always the pushback and then we fight again. But what is encouraging is that we still create, right? Teachers still teach and find ways to get books to young people. Parents are having conversations with their children. Sometimes that's not the loudest voice in the room. It doesn't get the attention or the interviews. The media is not talking to the teachers who are teaching the book and having these conversations. But I know that it's happening, and I feel very encouraged and inspired by that. And I just trust us that even if it has to be an underground library situation, underground freedom schools, things like that, we are going to find a way to continue to love on our children, teach them the truth, and make sure that we're not erased. And so, while I'm angry and upset, I'm also deeply inspired and encouraged by our young people who are raising up, by artists who are continuing to create, and by educators who are doing the good work in the classroom. I think it's time to go into our session with DJ.
Thank you. Thank you both for just your sharing and reflection. I love hearing you in conversation with each other. And Nicholas, I didn't see the announcement about those books. That is absolutely incredible.
Thank you.
We have a few sort of logistical questions from folks in the chat that you all that are kind of related there. So one is whether or not Born on the Water might ever be translated. The person specifically asked about Spanish, but I don't know if you all have any insight on that, if translation is an option. And another question is whether or not the artwork from the book might be made available to sort of purchase.
In terms of translation, it is a possibility. We don't know yet, but it's definitely something that could happen, and having different editions of the book. So I don't know, but maybe.
Yeah.
And the art, Nicholas?
Oh, in terms of?
Someone was asking, like, can they buy your art, or are there prints of the art? Do you want to talk about how you make the art?
I mean, in terms of Born on the Water, I don't think the individual art prints are for sale. But yeah, I have other stuff on my website.
Absolutely. And we'll share that again so that folks can go to that and check that out. You started to touch on this a bit in your conversation, but something that's really struck me as someone who's reading through unit plans, right, of the teachers that are doing this work, to your point, and the teachers that are engaging with the text, is that a lot of the teachers utilizing Born on the Water are using it in lesson plans that talk about creating, expressing ideas, that talk about art. When you were making the book, did you think about it as a tool for art education and discussion in addition to being a tool for teaching history, or was the teaching history more of the focus? Like, I'm curious about that piece.
Yeah, it's always at the forefront of my mind. When I'm writing any of my books, I'm thinking how an educator might use this in the classroom to expand the conversation, to get young people to engage with the characters in the book. And I'm thinking of the art making that could happen inspired by the book. So yes, it was definitely at the forefront of my mind, thinking about poetry. And if we write this in verse, young people could then write poems about their legacy and their family, their questions, and celebrate where they come from. So yes, for sure, I was thinking about art and art making in the classroom.
What about you, Nicholas? Were you in the you talked a lot sort of about the intention you put into the illustration, but were you also thinking about that student side of what artwork they might then be inspired to do?
I mean, I feel like all of the art that I do, I think also that's one of the reasons why I was asked to do this in a way, because I felt like it meshed so well with the artivism that I do. And so I have like a Skillshare artivism class, and I'm constantly trying to like you know, teach students through the artwork. And like I said, like have history lessons. And so that when, you know, when young artists see the work, for one, they are, you know, hopefully inspired to make art that has activism infused. But also, you know, just being able to, in a way, like get young folks to start to pass along that message and through whatever type of artwork that they create. And so in a way, I just, you know, I kind of saw it as a continuation of that artivism platform that I've been trying to build, which is why I feel like this was like the dream project for me. And one of the, you know, it was a perfect match, I felt like. So yeah, I think it was, you know, trying to, I mean, I'm always thinking about, you know, young creatives, but also all types of, I try to say that like everyone is creative, everyone has that ability to you know, create art. And my process started as art as therapy, and I try to encourage everybody to, you know, just pick up a pencil, grab some paint, you know, throw it on a wall and use art to, use art as a therapeutic tool in a way.
I love that. We have a few questions about just the process of it. So one, I think is more for Renee, and whether or not you wrote the poems individually, if you know what that process looks like, if like how they were sort of pieced together. And I know you co-authored with Nicole, and so what that process of writing was like. And I'm also curious, you know, Nicholas, about your process, or how many drafts were involved. Just like what did it take to get you to feel okay, it's ready? And is there anything that you think was still unsaid or missing in the end?
So Nicole and I wrote the whole book together. Every poem is both of our voices. So we sat down, had a long conversation about the goals and what we wanted this book to do in the world, where we should start, and then kind of went to our separate corners and just did a lot of thinking and brainstorming on our own. And then I kind of outlined this map of like, okay, you know, we'll start here with the people's humanity. We'll go into what happened to them, with their response to what happened, and then our future, where are we going from there? That was kind of, you know, our outline, very vague and open, loosey-goosey. I will also add, we wrote this in the height of the pandemic. So we are quarantined, and in New York, it was very intense here. So it was just emotionally hard to write a book about enslaved people during a pandemic and not being in the same room with each other. Like I've never created in that way, but the distance kind of brought us closer together in a way. So we had a Google Doc, and we literally wrote, like, I would write the first stanza and then leave a note for her, like, okay, pick up from here, I'll come back after you. And then we just worked on it that way. Yeah. And I just have to say, you know, working with Nicole was an amazing experience. And I'm really grateful that she trusted me. You know, she's a journalist. And I think when I first said, let's do it in poetry, I think she was like, poetry? I don't write poetry. But I'm so glad that she trusted me, and that we were able to create this together. So yeah, every poem is both of our voices. Nicholas, when did you know that you were done? Like that, this is finished.
I think so. Like I was saying, for that the cover art, I had kind of just sketched out the idea. But when I don't do pencil sketches or anything. Like they're all digital paintings. I have like my tablet with the pen, and so the initial. You remember, like when I sent this, it was like it looked similar to this. You know, like it's not. It's like full color. It's just like a speed sketch, and that's how I make my art, is really just like speed painting. And so when I do my like weekly sketches, I give myself something like 30 minutes to 3 hours or whatever. And just, you know, I have to give myself a time limit, because I feel like if I don't give myself a limit, it's like it'll never be done. Like it's just always gonna be, I can always tweak something. But then also, you know, I feel like we made this book so quickly that there was a time limit for every finalization of each page. But you know, they didn't take very long, because I'm so used to doing the speed painting now. And it's like I always say, like I took you guys' poems, and I just try to internalize what I just read and just go on the speed painting. And a lot of the final pieces ended up looking very similar to like what the initial speed painting was. Because once I send it and I kind of get like a thumbs up, like this is looking right, then I'll just take another day or so and really get all the details in there, or maybe like go back to the history books or whatever and figure out what details, especially when there was like all those different tribes, trying to figure out how to symbolize each one of those tribes, through face paint or whatever. I feel like it was kind of faster than what typically it would take for a book. But I think that the speed painting process in a way helped kind of like, I don't know, it kind of like gives that the essence and the motion and all of that we were trying to pack into that. It kind of makes it that much more, it makes it feel that much more alive. Yeah,
absolutely. I have a question from one of the teachers in our network whose students work with the book about a specific page, a specific image. So this one here, they had a language and it's got, I don't know, you can't see with my glare, but you have the book in front of you. It's got the African continent and what looks like a handprint there. And Ms. Fields says, the students spent a lot of time studying this illustration. They interpreted it as African ancestors reaching out to those stolen, this image here. And she was just hoping you could share a bit of your thoughts about the design and the image to kind of take back to them. But that was their interpretation of the page, was those ancestors reaching out, which I thought was lovely.
Yeah, that is part of it. That's beautiful that they figured that out.
Fifth grade students.
I mean, wow. Like that, it was just like that line of like, the people are good with their hands and also knew how to make something out of nothing. There's just so much that is involved with the culture there and all of the beauty of it, but then also all of it being ripped away. I wanted to like kind of like give that impression, because as we go along in the story, you start to see very clearly how they made something out of nothing, but just kind of give the initial idea that these are gifted hands. These are hands that will do amazing things and have done amazing things. And yeah, just kind of all of it showing that essence from the kingdom of Ndongo, and then as we will one day see like the kind of like being ripped away and going, the transatlantic slave routes and all that stuff, really just kind of combining those two things. But yeah, that's awesome. They smart kids.
Yeah, they are. And I have one, this is a written quote from them. And Fareed just shared the link to this unit in the chat so that folks can follow there. I would put the text, but it's a screenshot of their written document. So hopefully you'll be able to read it and access it there. But the people who were enslaved were Black people from Africa. They were super smart. They were great farmers. They were artists and they had their own languages and loved. They were good at cooking and they were kings and queens and great doctors. And then there's a question here about how you can reclaim an historical identity. And the student says, reclaim means to take pride in and to uncover, to find out our historical identities and the history of our people. I think you can uncover and reclaim your historical identity by understanding your history, by asking your grandparents and other people about the past and what you respect and do to make history. So this student work is up on the portal with some others, but I wanted to, one, share it with you, and then two, hear a bit from you about any other student feedback you've received, what that's been like for you, and that this sort of part of the process that comes after everything is published, right? What that experience has been.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. I that's so powerful. Thinking about reclaiming your history, and that a fifth grader is thinking about that is really powerful to me. I just feel I'm so serious. I am very honored to be allowed into a young person's life. When I write a book, it's such an intimate conversation with a child, and to be trusted by educators and parents that I can spend time with your child and your student with this story, it means a lot to me. So whenever I get feedback that it has done what I have kind of hoped and prayed that it would do, it always is kind of confirmation, like, okay, I was put on this earth to be a storyteller, and I am in conversation constantly with our young people. So yeah, it means a lot to me. And it just goes to show that our young people are capable of having these conversations, that they want to, they have a lot of questions, and they have a lot to say. And so I just love that they are getting these opportunities to speak openly and boldly about how they're feeling about the world that they're living in. So thank you again to all the educators who are thinking about how to have these conversations and not shying away from that. It means a lot.
Nicholas, do you have any thoughts on that before we close, or anything else you want to share, I guess?
Somebody had asked about the M papers. I just think that this is for me another way that I think we can. There's so many ways for young folks to be able to grasp like very difficult topics, and I think breaking things down into different like symbols and motifs is one of the ways, and that's what I tried to do with the M papers, where you have like life, death, and rebirth, and that's how I kind of grouped like the entire meaning of the book was life, death, and rebirth, that I felt like in three different parts. And so you'll see a lot of you'll see a lot of different story beats, like you'll see the ship and the chains, and even like different parts of like Virginia, and all these things that will show, like, as young folks are going throughout the story, on different pages, they'll see like, oh, you'll see the X, when it goes to the kind of shop that is destroyed and everyone is stolen, you'll see more X's. And then, when it gets towards the resistance and the hope, you'll see more of the wavy lines. And I just feel like that's a great way to kind of put very difficult topics into a way that kids can kind of interact and also learn. I think in some ways they'll be able to remember more of these important moments in ways that they can kind of share it on, like through their artwork, as if they kind of put it in different symbols like that. So that's what the end papers were about. And I'm glad that, we could all have this time to talk through everything. This was really great.
Yeah, thank you so much. I know there were a few questions we didn't get to in the chat. Feel free to reach out to 1618 at pulitzer.org with more of those. There was one about whether you can use this book with middle school. Yes, we have a unit where it was used with high school. You can use this book with adults. And there are some really great guides that have been written for teachers on how to utilize and implement Born on the Water that you can also access through our portal, 1619education.org. Thank you so much to you both, Nicholas and Renee. Thank you to our attendees for coming to this keynote. Our next conference event is a panel teaching the next generation of teachers, the 1619 books in schools of education. So if you are curious about how this is being used at the university level, if you know others that might be curious in that conversation, definitely come to that. That starts at 2:15 Eastern time. Until then, please continue sharing your thoughts and your takeaways using the hashtag teaching1619. You can connect with other attendees and participants on social media in that way. We also encourage you to consider applying for the next cohort of the 1618 Education Network. Our applications will launch this week on our website and in our education newsletter. So thank you all so much, and I hope to see you at 2:15.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.